So welcome everyone. My name is Ariel Yudim Chung. I go by she, her, and I am this year's shootout coordinator. Just a brief explanation, the Asian American Film Lab is a nonprofit devoted to the promotion and support of gender and racial parity in film and television programming. And the 72-hour shootout is the Film Lab's annual global filmmaking competition celebrating diversity in front of and behind the camera. This workshop is part of the Shootouts programming to increase accessibility and help our fellow filmmakers to take a step further into their career or artistic endeavor. So I'm going to start by introducing our amazing workshop instructor, Christopher Hwisu Kim. Christopher Hwisu Kim, him, is a four-time Lone Star Emmy Award winner and a video producer at The New Yorker. He's currently in post-production on his short film Missile. His short film Spam Three Ways has garnered festival accolades, including Best Short Documentary Script at the New York City Short Documentary Festival. In addition to filmmaking, he also writes occasionally. His most recent piece, You Should Read It, I actually did read it, in The New Yorker explores the heartfelt origin of his daughter's Korean name. With a keen focus on the Korean diaspora, his work explores themes of belonging, heritage, and family. And now I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Hey, everyone. Nice to see your faces. Okay, so we're gonna today go through just sort of my philosophy on running an effective crowdfunding campaign. And then afterwards, we'll take some questions, and I would like it to be like an open forum where we could just talk about, best practices for this kind of stuff. All right, so welcome. And, a lot of this is about learning lessons the hard way. I certainly had to do that. So I'm hoping that I can pass on my lessons to you so you don't have to learn them the hard way. And the nature of today's workshop, I wanted to center on basically everything leading up to actually launching the campaign. Because I'm of the firm belief that running an effective crowdfunding campaign is all in the prep work. It's all in like preparing everything, your messaging, your philosophy, all of that stuff beforehand. And yeah, my thought is that an effective crowdfunding campaign, it's more than just asking your family and friends for money. But also, it's not about asking your friends and family for money. So you have to be comfortable with that. A little bit about me, this is a little redundant, but I'm Chris, filmmaker in Brooklyn. In my day job, I do work at The New Yorker as a video producer, which is, pretty prestigious and very awesome. Of course, my Korean immigrant parents don't know what The New Yorker is, so they have no idea how cool that is, and they remain unimpressed. I have a decade or more of experience shooting, producing, and editing nonfiction films. And I'm specifying nonfiction because I'm steadily trying to shift towards fiction filmmaking, and this film that we're going to talk about today, Missile, is sort of my first big major step into that. And we'll go into detail on that film and its crowdfunding campaign throughout this presentation. Okay, so like I said, I think it's all about prep work. I'm going to call all of this stuff your North Star. The thing that, like, when you're lost in the sort of sea of decision making, you can always look towards these things as you're building out your crowdfunding campaign. So the first thing I would really strongly recommend you nail down is your story, your audience, and lastly, your numbers. All right, so all of that encompasses your North Star. And like I said, there's a sea of decision making out there. There's just so many choices you have to make, so many calls you have to make. And if you have all of this settled beforehand, it just makes everything way more easy. All right, so the first thing, knowing your story, and I mean that in two ways. One, of course, is just the story you're telling now and the story you're selling now. And second, but also arguably just as important, is the story you've lived until now. So it's about getting those things crystal clear. So let's break that down a little bit more. So when we're talking about the story you're telling and selling now, it feels like an easy question because, like, we're all filmmakers here. We all have the story in our head, right? And I found the most difficult thing is taking that vision in your head and actually translating it into words. And not just like vomiting it out there. You have to have the ability to distill it into its essence. Like you take your amazing, great big story, and you have to find a way to nail it down in just like a sentence or two. And I personally, I find that harder than writing like the full actual screenplay. It's incredibly difficult because it's like, you spend so much time crafting this story that's laid out with beats um, and rhythm and all that stuff, and you have to be like, okay, how do I make it a sentence? Whether that's a log line, an elevator pitch, whatever you want to call it, you have to find the quickest and most engaging way to pitch your story. So as an example, let's look at Missile. So the initial log line I came up with: when Allison Cho gets an emergency alert on her phone, warning of an imminent missile attack, she calls her mom in a panic, only to struggle to explain the situation because she doesn't know the Korean word for missile. I'm really proud of that. I think like I took, what's gonna probably be a 15-minute story. And I'm not revealing the ending, I'm not revealing the whole story, but I'm kind of centering the central action and the central tension into one sentence. The central action being this missile attack, the central tension being Allison's inability to talk to her immigrant mom. So I'm really proud of that. I got down into one sentence. I mean, yes, there's an M dash in there, so maybe it's cheating, but I work for the New Yorker, so we're cool with M dashes. One thing to keep in mind: Kickstarter, for their like little logline section, only allows 135 characters. So this is too long, which I found out the hard way. So I had to distill it out even further. So here's what I came up for the Kickstarter logline. Allison Cho thinks she's about to die from a missile attack, but can't explain the situation to her mom because her Korean sucks. I think that's still pretty decent. And it's a little more colloquial too, with like, saying her Korean sucks. So, just keep that in mind, 135 characters for Kickstarter. Okay, so now let's talk about the campaign itself and specifically about the video, because this is such an important part. What you're seeing here is just in the background is my crowdfunding video for Missile. So we're just gonna stick with the same philosophies we've been talking about. It's about communicating your story concisely and powerfully. Keep it short, something like 3 minutes even, because realistically, people are gonna like make up their mind in the first few seconds. They're gonna see like this person has it or they don't within the first few seconds, right? And so for Missile, in the video you saw, I opened with a recreation of the sort of scenario, the missile alert scenario. I filmed it on anamorphic lenses so that it can kind of look cinematic. And just to kind of convey the vibe I'm going for. And then I quickly moved to me addressing the camera directly, just explaining the project, the origin of it, and why it matters to me. Here you're seeing like pictures of my family. And we also got commissioned an artist friend of mine to do these wonderful concept illustrations, just to have some like strong visuals. And then this is some of my past work. And so, yeah, it's all about just being concise, engaging, getting to the point, showing how cool you are, how great your work is, and moving on. So I'm gonna move on from that. Okay, so speaking of all of that, the second aspect of stories, the story you've lived until now. And that means you. Who are you as a person? But not only that, but who are you as a filmmaker? Both are important. So when I talk about knowing the story you've lived, really the goal is to build excitement for you and your team as individuals. You're trying to demonstrate that like everyone who's working on this film is a passionate, like-minded, hardworking, experienced person, and they're the real deal. So here you have myself and my primary two collaborators on this piece, who all like, in their bios will go on to explain like why this film mattered to them and how their past work reflects, reflects their interest in telling Korean diaspora stories. Okay, so continuing on that same line of thought, my personal philosophy is to try to create a human connection with potential donors. I want them to, go to Missil's crowdfunding page and basically walk away knowing something about me, and to factor that into whether or not they actually want to donate. And perhaps it's a little arrogant, but my hope is that like they see me, they see my family, they think this is a cool dude who means well, he's talented, I want to support him. It is very much about, it's a people business, it really is. And it made sense for this story specifically because it is so like semi-autobiographical. It pulls from like my experience as a child of Korean immigrants and being, having difficulty speaking with my parents in their language. Now, this isn't the right move for everybody. Your mileage may vary. It's not right. It's not the right approach for every film or for every person. And everyone has their own set of boundaries, but like get a sense of like how you want to pitch you as a filmmaker and a person, because I do think it is important for your crowdfunding campaign to incorporate that stuff. Talking about yourself as a filmmaker, it's really about demonstrating mastery of the craft, right? So here you're seeing my short film spanned 3 ways. Now, like I said, I've worked mostly in nonfiction to this point. And so like, I can't show a short film and be like, this is the kind of short film I make. But what I can show is like my nonfiction work, my documentary work, and say, look, I've always been interested in this, telling this kind of story, telling stories of like that are personal in nature, that are about the Korean diaspora, that talk about outsiders, all that stuff, right? So like Span 3 Ways is a perfect example of that. It also shows like sort of my cinematic style and my sort of aesthetic as a filmmaker. And so threaded throughout Missil's crowdfunding campaign is, this film and also my other films that also kind of lean into all of that stuff. Okay, so that's knowing your story. Now let's move on to your actual audience. Obviously in the context of crowdfunding, that includes or is primarily about potential donors. So the prior section about like knowing who you are as a person, as a filmmaker, a lot of it is dictated about who your audience is. It does matter, how you present yourself depending on the audience. So I like to break this down into 3 sections. I like to think of my close network, my secondary network, and sort of my unknown network, people that I, we'll get into it. So your close network, first step is to define them. So like I said at the beginning, this is in a lot of ways about asking your friends and family for money. So you do have to think about like, who are they? What do they have in common, right? Like it's not as simple as like, they're your friends, they're your family. Like think about, are they all a similar age, similar politics, similar aesthetic sensibilities, similar interests? Find the things that kind of like are common among all of your friends and family and weave that into how you pitch the story to them. Think about how they're going to connect to the story you're telling. Because for Missil, it came really naturally because it is like a story about an exploration about, being in the Asian diaspora. And so naturally, a lot of my family and my friends would like really emotionally, viscerally respond to that kind of storytelling. And so what we did is like a lot of the messaging on social media and in the campaign was written in like a really personal and sincere tone, as if I were talking to my friends, because largely I was. And then lastly, who are they? And when I say that, I mean literally, who are they? And as crass as it might sound, what I did is I actually created a spreadsheet with all of my family and friends who I expected would donate. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. But first, let's talk about your secondary network. We're thinking about acquaintances, work colleagues, people you made awkward small talk with at a party one time who are way cooler than you, but you think ultimately like you just fine and you're overthinking. All right, so now let's talk about that spreadsheet I mentioned. Because in this spreadsheet, we want to include your close network and your secondary network. And I went into that with like so much dread. I was like, I'm barely going to come up with like 5 people to put on this list, right? Like, I'm like, who's going to give me money? This is absurd. And then like, I just like went through my Instagram friends, my Facebook friends, all of that stuff. And I just like wrote down names of people who I thought like, okay, I'm close with this person. I think they'd donate. I think they'd like the story. And I ended up with nearly 60 names just from like the close and secondary network. And yeah, I think it was a nice, pleasant surprise for me, knowing that like I had way more people in my life who were probably going to support me than I initially thought. And so those 2 groups are sort of your foundation of a successful crowdfunding campaign, but there is this like unknown variable, right? Of like people who just stumble upon your page, or either through social media or through like the crowdfunding platform itself, like Kickstarter. And don't take this for, don't assume that like you're not going to get, these people. Like you're going to have just random people who just like your project, who just stumble upon it and love it. So for example, on Missile, our highest donation tier was a $3,000 donation tier. And I was like, okay, no one in my immediate network is going to donate $3,000. I'm not from rich people. We don't have that kind of money to throw around. But I wanted to put it out there anyway, just in case. And wouldn't you know it, we get 2 people to donate at that level, and neither of them are people I know. Once I got to talking with them, it turned out that they just were browsing through Kickstarter, found the story, believed in it, and decided to donate. And so like leave that door open. Like don't assume that you're not going to get, sort of really sympathetic people who just want to support you. Another example, just think about people with big social media followings who are sensitive to like, and sympathetic to and excited about like your particular cause or the kind of story you're telling. So for me, I reached out to this guy named Se Chun, who's a filmmaker, showrunner. Some of you probably already follow him on Twitter. And he spent like a year, I think, like retweeting every single day, just any old random Asian creator who would contact him and say, hey, put my work out there. And he would do it without a second thought. And so I was like, okay, I bet he would retweet this. And so this is the DM I sent him. He never actually responded to it, but as soon as I sent it to him, like within a minute, he retweeted it. And we got like tons of people who I'd never met. We got a lot of social media traction, and then like that led to, a good chunk of donations that were unexpected. All right, so those are the types of people you want. And lastly, I want you to think about like connections through your connections. Now I'm really lucky and privileged in that I work at the New Yorker. So I get to work with a lot of filmmakers. And one of the filmmakers I worked with happened to have a working relationship with someone at Kickstarter who works on their film team. And so he very kindly put us in touch. And that person, that Kickstarter executive, ended up being like a huge support in this. And like, immediately paid dividends, because as soon as we launched, we were a Kickstarter project we love, so like things like that. And in fact, like one early day, I remember we just kept getting donations from names that I didn't recognize. And I was like, what's going on? So I'd go to Kickstarter, and wouldn't you know it, here's a screenshot of that day. Missile was the the featured project on Kickstarter.com. It completely blew my mind. Now, let's be clear, not everyone has these sort of industry connections. My point, though, is that you should be nice and kind and helpful to everyone you come across. Because what happened was that like this filmmaker that I was working with, he did have difficulty getting projects finished at the New Yorker when working with other people. And I came in and I was like the guy who got it done, the guy who was like super supportive and helpful along the way. And when it came time for my project, he reached out to me and said, I'm going to help you because you helped me. And there's this common misconception, you see it all the time in this industry, that like you get ahead by being cutthroat and uncompromising. And I'm just like, not only is that like toxic and weird, it's honestly just plain wrong. In my experience, being kind to the people you work with means that they'll be kind to you right back. And here's the sort of the part I was dreading the most, which is knowing your numbers. This is hard for, I think, artistic people in particular. Step one is making your budget, and you have to make an honest budget, meaning don't mentally trick yourself into thinking, oh, this won't be that expensive, or be like, oh, I'm not going to include this one thing because I bet I can get them to do it for free or whatever. Assume that everyone's going to be paid their full rate and lay it out and just see what your budget is. Much like that spreadsheet of close friends and family that I mentioned, a similar thing happened here. Like once I laid it all down on paper, I was like, oh, this is way more than I originally thought. And here's an early version of just a portion of our initial budget. This isn't like the final thing, but just to give you a general idea of how these things are structured, if that's helpful to you. And it, as you can see, it adds up really quickly. If you're paying people like a fair and livable wage, or what in my opinion is a fair and livable wage, and you'll notice this is even with the director estimate, budget estimate being $0. It still adds up, still a lot of money. And that's just a portion of it. But it's a crucial piece of information to have. So moving forward, I think, taking that spreadsheet of your close and secondary network, what I would do is reach out to the most sympathetic people on that list and ask them to pledge to donate on day one. There's a number floated out there that like suggests that getting to 30% of your goal amount on day one is a big sign that you'll meet your funding goal. I haven't personally found the research that behind that, but it feels right. And so in the modern world, that's good enough. But anecdotally, I can say that that is a really strong goal to aim for. It does just so many things. Like it makes future donors feel like way more confident in your project. It'll probably make the crowdfunding platform you're on like much more likely to select it for their staff pick or project we love or whatever equivalent thing they have. And for what it's worth, Missile, we fell short of that 30% on day one goal. We were probably in the range of 20 to 25%, and we still met our funding goal very comfortably. And speaking of goals, funding goal, you have to set a good goal amount. Let's go into this a little bit further because I think this is like the thing that like people ask me about the most, and that is the most confusing initially. And so I think the biggest mistake I see actually is that people set their goal amount too low. I know why people do this. I have done this on prior campaigns, and especially on something like Kickstarter, which is like an all or nothing funding model. You just want to like be guaranteed to get something, but the danger is that psychologically, what I have seen happen is that once you meet your funding goal, people are just like less motivated to donate to your campaign because in their heads, if you set a goal of like $5,000 and you hit $5,000 in a couple of days, they're like, oh, then they got their budget, they got what they needed, right? We all know it costs way more than that to make a film, but they don't know that, and so they're like, oh, then they're set, they don't need it. So don't go too low, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, don't go too high. This is kind of obvious, but like I think the danger here is that it can communicate the wrong message to everyone. Maybe your short film actually does cost $50,000 to make. That is totally feasible. I think the general public won't understand why. And so if that is going to be the amount you're going to fundraise for, fine, but make sure you really clearly communicate why it's going to cost that much. Where's that money going? And just make your potential donors like really confident that like you're taking good care of that money. And so really the goal here is the reason I'm so strict about the budget is that's really going to help you determine your goal amount. And that's why I'm asking you to be honest about your budget. So for Missile, our total amount that our budget ended up being was a little over 30,000. That's a lot. And so basically that's with a fully paid cast and crew of over a dozen people. That's insurance, that's gear rental, that's catering, that's COVID supplies, all of that stuff, right? And so that about 30,000. And I knew that I personally I have about $10,000 I could spare that would help fund it. So, that's a big chunk of it. And then the other thing you do is you look at the list of your potential donors and think about how much approximately will that add up to. And so all of that in mind, we set our goal amount to 15,000 with the expectation that we probably exceed it. But that would, even if we only got 50,000, that would really help help us get through production. So all of that is your North Star, your story, your audience, and your numbers. I really, really think if you nail all of those things down beforehand, you're going to make your life so much easier with this crowdfunding campaign, and it'll like make your crowdfunding campaign that much more successful. Because I think, people who want to donate will sense the confidence with which you're pitching, like your stuff, and they'll sense that. So for Missile, at the end of 30 days, with a goal amount of 15,000, we got 164 backers, and we raised $19,000.23. This is like a cool fireworks display they do for you when you're done. And after associated fees and Kickstarter's cut, we ended up taking home $17,331. And so that, plus my own contribution, gave us plenty to get through production. Here's some pictures of our production. Is 3 stressful but amazing, beautiful collaborative days. And I believe that if you approach it the right way, that this can be you too. All right, so I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Christopher. You can shout out your questions or put it in the chat. We have a few more minutes. If not, I have a lot of questions. So I can get started, but people please put it in the chat. Sorry if there's some noise behind, but you talked about like budget giving credibility to the project too. How much of that did you actually share with your audience, the whole budget, or just some abstract numbers?
We gave abstract numbers. So we did a lot of like, actually, let me put a link to our actual crowdfunding page, and then at the bottom, you'll see a pie chart. So we didn't give exact numbers or share our exact budget, but we did give us a sort of relative sense of like where that money's going. So if you scroll down towards the bottom, you'll see a pie chart that breaks down the costs. And we felt like that was a good medium, where we felt weird about like giving our actual budget out there. But we did want to make it clear, like, generally speaking, where is everything going? So we felt like that was a good compromise.
Leah has a question. The little doomsday question. What if you can't meet the goal?
That's the fear, right? That's like the fear, number one fear going into crowdfunding is what if you can't meet the goal? Now, Kickstarter is like, not the only option, right? They do have an all or nothing model, but like there are plenty of other sites that don't do that. I think it's called Seed and Spark. I know plenty of filmmaker friends who've used them, and they don't have that restriction. And so that's totally an option where you can work on one of these platforms that don't have that restriction. My thinking is that when you have a funding goal and you communicate to everyone that this is all or nothing, then it's a motivating factor, and like, it makes your friends and family want to donate more so than usual. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Like I said, I know plenty of people who use other crowdfunding platforms to great success. And so that's totally an option too. An accountant is not a bad idea. We hired a lawyer who has asked multiple times, when are you guys getting an accountant? So I think my lawyer would agree that you should have an accountant for, especially when you're talking about like raising 15,000 or something in that range. It's a good idea. Now I have managed to do it without an accountant and been okay. We'll see come tax season next year if I feel the same way, but do as I say, not as I do. I think an accountant is a good idea.
I do also want to point out that what Christopher just showed us about building your story not only applies to Kickstarter campaigns or crowdfunding campaigns, but also to grants. There's a lot of grants out there where
Yeah.
it could be a project-based grants or just simply for the grant the filmmaker. So please look into that too. And New York City especially has a lot of those from the government too.
Yeah, there's a ton. And especially for nonfiction work, there's a lot of grants. So yeah, definitely look out for those.
Okay. Oh, one more question.
Oh, hey, Trent. Oh, that's, you know what? I should have covered this in the presentation. So what we did through our campaign is we beforehand lined up a bunch of mini campaigns, like broke it down week by week. Like on this week, we're going to do this kind of thing. On this week, we're going to do this kind of thing. Now, to be perfectly frank, a lot of those mini campaigns didn't result in like more donations, but it kept up the momentum in terms of social media coverage and all that stuff, and just keeping the project on people's mind. I would think about maybe something like that. Like, you know, we did one where it was like next 10 donors who donate this amount get to be extras in the film, or, you know, we did a thing called Dollar Day, where it's like if everyone just donated $1 today who's following us, then we'd get our goal within X amount of hours or whatever. You know what I mean? Like things like that. So, you know, be creative. Think about ways to really motivate people to donate, and don't be afraid to like, yeah, I don't know, add gifts, add incentives, things of that nature.
Yes, Trent, use that opportunity. You're in a room full of filmmakers right now. Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Christopher. I hope this was helpful for everyone. It certainly was helpful, and I really needed this when I was just coming out of school, trying to make passion projects work, but my wallet was pretty thin. We also have, let's see, I know that a lot of people in this room are currently contestants, which is good, but I'm also gonna drop here. It is our last day to register for our regular registration. We do go on to our late registration from tomorrow. Speaking of money, it will get more expensive. So if you are interested, please go on register today. Don't procrastinate about it. It's a pretty short one.
How hard is it? I would say, you know, it's a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of like, yeah, it's just all the stuff I just talked about, like laying all that stuff out, writing it all out. That's just a ton of work. So I think it's really more about quantity over like, is it hard? I think if you have the work ethic, and especially if you have good collaborators and can sort of tag team this stuff, like it's a